Patna. Today we will study the supportive part of the central nervous system. Basically, the nervous system is meant to respond to a stimulus, and stimulus is change in the environment. Now, we perceive the change. The information travels to the brain through the sensory system, and the brain responds to it through the motor system and the autonomic system appropriately. Now, some information reaches the consciousness, and that is the voluntary part of the response. But a lot of information never reaches the consciousness, and that is the reflex part of the response. If we want to draw it pictorially, if this is the brain, here you have the pons, the medulla oblongata, the superior and the inferior cerebellar peduncles, and here you have the cerebellum. So, some information will go to the consciousness, and there will be a voluntary response to it. Whereas the other information will go to the cerebellum, and there will be a reflex response to it. So today we will concentrate on what doesn't reach the consciousness, where the response is reflex. So cerebellum connected to the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, through the superior cerebellar peduncle, the middle cerebellar peduncle, and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, is the secretory of the cortex. So it must first find out from the cortex what does the cortex want. So from here, the cortico-ponto-cerebellar tracts, this is the pons, cortico-ponto-cerebellar tracts, carry the information of what is the intention of the cortex. Then what happens is that the cerebellum must know what is the present position of the body, and at what rate it is changing, so that what will be the projected position of the body. At time t. Then it compares the intention to the projection to calculate what is the correction needed and this correction it provides through the supportive motor system which we also call the extra pyramidal system. So the way that it finds out the present position and at what rate it is changing is called as the supportive sensory system. The first component of the supportive sensory system is the eye, which through the tectocerebellar tracts, through the tectum is in the midbrain, so through the tectocerebellar tracts sends the information to the cerebellum. So this is the information which comes from the eye. Then the information comes through the ear. This information goes through the pons, through the vestibular nucleus, and through this vestibular nucleus, it is the vestibulocerebellar pathways, that convey the information from the semicircular canals, of the internal ear as to what is the present position of the head and at what rate it is changing. Then there is the muscle and joint sense. Which muscle is contracted how much? What is the length between its origin and insertion, and what is the tone? So muscle length and tone travels through the posterior column of the spinal cord and goes to the cerebellum of the same side through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, crosses over as internal arcuate fibers and then anterior-external arcuate fibers and goes through the cerebellum of the opposite side. So these tracts are called as posterior column. They are also called as fasciculus cuneatus and gracilis. Another way this information travels is through the anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts. The spinocerebellar tracts carry the joint information through the superior cerebellar peduncle and through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, the spinocerebellar tracts. So information from the spinal cord, muscle and joint, what is the length of muscle, what is the tone of muscle, what is the position of the joint, at what rate it is changing, is carried by the spinocerebellar tracts, anterior and lateral, through the inferior and the superior cerebellar peduncles to both sides of the cerebellum. Therefore, from the eye, from the vestibular system and from the muscle and joint sense, travels to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is able to decipher what is the present position of the head, of the body, joints and muscles of the body, at what rate it is changing, and what will be the projected position at the time t. Now then it subtracts the intention of the cortex and the projected position, and it finds out what is the correction needed, and from this correction needed it approaches the cerebellum, approaches the area 4S the basal ganglion, the subthalamic nucleus, the substantia nigra of the midbrain, the red nucleus, the reticular formation, and the internuncial neuron system of the spinal cord. Reticular formation and internuncial neuron of the spinal cord. And by these, all these centers, they control what is called as the stretch reflex. And the stretch reflex tries to maintain the normal tone at the desired length of that particular muscle. This is how the stretch reflex does it. The stretch reflex has got some fibers which are called, the muscle has got intrafusal fibers, the ends of which is muscular. In the center of it, it has got an annulospiral ring. It has got an annulospiral ring. Now this annulospiral ring goes into the spinal cord. Then there are extrafusal fibers which are basically connecting the origin and the insertion. Now, supposing there is a stretch, that means the length between the origin and insertion increases. This length increases. Therefore, the distance between the coils of the annulospiral ring also increase. As soon as that happens, impulses go into the spinal cord, and from here there are fibers which come to the extrafusal system and they contract so that the distance is maintained. So this stretch reflex maintains the distance between the origin and insertion by maintaining the length, the distance between the fibers of the annulospiral ring. So the extrapyramidal system that comes basically acts on this part of the intrafusal fibers. These are gamma neurons. So that when these part contract, the distance between annulospiral ring increases and the extrafusal fibers contract so that the origin comes nearer the insertion till the distance between the coils of the annulospiral ring is restored. So this is exactly where the extrapyramidal system output comes. Therefore, the entire supportive sensory and motor system is designed to make the muscle contract to the desired length. For example, my elbow will contract this much. If this system didn't exist, it would have contracted this much. So this is in short, the cerebellum. Now we'll see what happens when it becomes abnormal. That same grid which tells us is it the supportive system which is involved. The answer is yes, if there is something which is called as ataxia. Ataxia simply means that you are not able to reach the position where you want to reach. For example, I want the tip of this pencil to reach here it doesn't reach here but reaches here, or sometimes reaches here, or sometimes starts trembling between here and there and then finally lands up here. So ataxia is that the corrective influence is not provided, and if the cortex intends something to reach here, it doesn't reach here but it reaches here, or waxes like this and reaches here. So this is ataxia. Okay? And whenever there is ataxia, one of the first thing that happens is that repetitive movement is lost. So that is called as dysdiadochokinesia. The third thing that happens is that the walking becomes ataxic. If you want to see what ataxic walking is like, just go and see post-alcohol what is happening to people. So that is what is called as ataxic gait. The fourth thing is that the person may complain of vertigo, imbalance, and sometimes it may be so severe that they may be vomiting or nausea. So whenever these are the symptoms, then you say that probably the supportive system is involved. Now what can be the involvement? Involvement can be spinal. So this is called a spinal ataxia. So spinal ataxia is when the posterior column is involved, and posterior column is involved in tabes dorsalis. Tertiary syphilis presents as either tabes dorsalis or general paralysis of insane. The second is that there can be involvement of the cerebellum. So spinal ataxia will be aggravated if you close your eyes. And this means this is called as the Romberg sign. Cerebellum is usually involved in cerebellar degeneration. And finally, you have the involvement of the extrapyramidal system, where there are usually abnormal movements, as in chorea athetosis, or there is Parkinsonism. So these are the abnormalities of the cerebellar system, or the supportive system, reflex system, which supports locomotion or movement.